Good afternoon. Welcome to this caregiver webinar presented by the Brain Injury Association of America. Today's topic is Just One, Building Cognitive and Emotional Bandwidth After Brain Injury. Today's attendees are all muted. If you have a question, please type it in using the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and our presenter will answer questions at the end. Audrey Yetter is a speech-language pathologist and executive function coach in Southwest Montana. She has clinically served adults with neurogenic communication disorders for 17 years. Audra is currently in private practice and previously worked in hospital, outpatient, and acute care settings. Welcome, Audra.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it sounds good. Thanks. Yeah, good.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on building bandwidth after brain injury. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I wanted to thank the Brain Injury Association of America for inviting me today to speak with you. I'm going to be speaking for about 50 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So feel free to write it down on a piece of paper, or as the questions come to you, you can go ahead and type it in the box. And I was asked to gear this talk toward care partners. However, if you are a brain injury survivor or if you're a clinician, I think that you're going to find some really useful information here for yourself as well. A couple disclosures here. I own a solo private practice here in Montana, and I also get paid as an executive function coach for a neuropsychology practice in Washington. Some non-financial disclosures. I sit on the executive board of the Academy of Neurologic Communication Disorders and Sciences, and for them, I chair the board of clinical certification. Just to orient us for today, there's three things that I want you to leave with. First, we're going to look at some of the common sources of cognitive and emotional overload that can impact thinking, communication, and day-to-day functioning after brain injury, applicable both to survivors and to care partners. Secondly, we're going to walk through a simple strategy that I call Just One. And that's a way to support task initiation and reduce the sense of overwhelm that comes in daily routines and other activities. And third, we'll connect this idea to some acceptance and values-based ideas from acceptance and commitment therapy and how these can show up in real-world communication and follow-through within our lives. So today is really about what gets in the way of starting and what helps people actually begin, especially when our capacity or our bandwidth is reduced. So I'd like everyone, if you have a piece of paper, that's ideal because we're going to use this later for an exercise together. So I'd like everyone just to think of something, and we're just going to keep it to ourselves right now, so no need to put that in the Q&A. What is one thing that you've been wanting or needing to do, but you haven't been able to get yourself to start? It doesn't have to be something big. It could be something small or simple. If you're a care partner, it might be something that you've been meaning to do for yourself, something that is related to helping your loved one. It could truly be anything. So I'm just going to give everyone about half a minute to write something down. Okay. Hopefully, you've all had a chance to think of something. I know I could probably think of 10 things right now that are true for me. So we're just going to save that for a moment, whatever you wrote down. And most of us don't struggle with knowing what needs to be done. We actually struggle with getting started. By the end of our time together today, you'll understand why getting started can be so hard, especially in the context of caregiving. And you're going to leave with a simple, practical way to get unstuck in those moments. It's not going to be with brute force willpower, but by changing how we approach the very first step. So, if getting started can feel hard, what's actually going on? To understand that, it helps us to unpack a little bit something that's called executive functioning. You've probably heard of the term executive functioning at some point. Executive functions are a family of cognitive skills that we all have that work in concert to allow us to carry out our intentions and our goals. It could be big goals and it could be very small, everyday goals. One way that we can think about executive function is the relationship between a conductor and an orchestra. Our brains have all kinds of abilities. They do things like they process what we see, they speak, our brains interpret what we hear, they move our body through space, and they keep balance for us. And this is kind of like all the different parts of the symphony, like the brass and the strings and the woodwinds, the percussion, and so on. So imagine if we get a great group of musicians together. They're all highly skilled and they have wonderful instruments. But what's missing for us to have a symphony? We need a conductor. Our executive functions are the conductor. And to correspond that to the brain, we can relate that to our frontal lobes that are like the conductor of the rest of the brain. So I'd like everyone just to think for a moment of what is something that a conductor does. And you can just write that down on your piece of paper or just think about that in your mind for a second. Some of the things that come to mind for me about what a conductor does is they keep time. So everyone is on the same part of the piece at the same time. They make a lot of important decisions. So they might choose what piece the symphony is going to play based off of a lot of judgment calls of what the musicians are capable of and what the community might enjoy hearing. They plan rehearsals. While the performance is going on, maybe they bring in the woodwinds and they fade out the brass. And they have to pay attention to everything that's going on and make rapid adjustments and so on. Probably a lot more things we could think of as well. And so this is really what our executive functions do for us. Things like planning, organizing. Our executive functions help us regulate stress and emotions while we're working toward our goals so it doesn't pull us off track. Our executive functions remember, select information in order to accomplish the goal. They sustain our attention so we can get to the goal and so on. I want to highlight one important executive function in particular. So while the conductor is pulling off all these tasks, they're also responsible for initiating. They initiate the rehearsal, the performance, they initiate the next movement after the first one's done. A conductor can't wait until every musician feels perfectly ready, until every instrument is perfectly tuned and the room is completely quiet before beginning. Sometimes they have to just lift the baton and start. And this is the idea of starting or initiating that we're going to focus on today. So again, it's one component of this interrelated family of executive functions. And just like all of the executive functions, which are delicate and complex skills within our brain, they can be vulnerable to not only injury, but stress, fatigue, all kinds of things. And this is true for the evolutionarily newer parts of our brain that are just a lot more sensitive to factors like that might be taxing them. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into task initiation. What exactly do we mean by task initiation? It's the ability to start a task when you intend to. So we're not talking about completing the task. We're not necessarily talking about what's happening during completion, not doing it perfectly, but really just that moment of starting. So I'd like you just to think like how many of you have had the experience of knowing what needs to be done and difficulty starting. I know that it's something that I live with every day, that we all do. It's kind of part of being a human. So I just want us to really separate knowing what needs to be done and then actually taking action and starting it. So for now, we're talking about going beyond the thought part and actually taking action to get started. Task initiation doesn't live in a vacuum. There's a lot that goes into it. We can think about this complexity in just broadly in three categories. So in this first category, sometimes a task that we're trying to get started on actually has a lot of moving parts. And then the underlying steps are ambiguous. So think about if the thing you're trying to start is create a routine, deal with insurance, figure out what's happening with the bank. These are actually really broad, and there's a lot of hidden steps underneath that. It's more complex than just something with a simple beginning and end. So this could be a reason why it's hard to get started. Other times, if you think back to the rest of the executive functions, back with the conductor, there's other parts of the executive function system that relate to starting, and that if they're not finely tuned, they might be undermining our ability to get started. So if we don't know what to do first, if we don't have a plan or we haven't prioritized what to do first, it's really hard to start. If we can't focus, it's also really hard to start. Another category that's a huge one is what comes up for us when we're trying to get started. So when you think about starting something, especially if it has any kind of ick to it, um, we can have all kinds of thoughts or emotions or overwhelm come up when we try to do that. So most of the time, it's not just one of these. It's usually an interaction between all of it. And hopefully, through looking at this, we can just appreciate that it's not that simple to start. It actually can be really hard. So now let's think a little bit about how load affects task initiation. And this is one that is so true for care partners. So over here on the green, this just represents the normal task initiation difficulty that we all have as human beings, that we all have difficulty initiating certain things. But now let's consider that we're in a situation caregiving, and now there is a significant increase in life demands, and our overall load of what we have to juggle has increased. Um, so things that used to feel relatively easy can now start to feel a lot harder and overwhelming. There's less capacity because you're just handling so much more. And then let's consider in a caregiving role that there's a lot of emotions that come with that. There might be a lot of grief. There's a lot of overwhelm. You're navigating a different role in life. It's stressful. It's tiring. So now this dial is turned up really high. So in this situation, when we're in the yellow, we're moving up to the red, starting will likely feel a lot harder, not because there's anything wrong with you, but because the system is under huge load. And I also just wanted to note that often the dial is going to be up toward the red for a chronic period, for a long period of time. So waiting to feel ready is not necessarily going to be helpful because the dial may not be going down anytime soon, just realistically. So some things that might come up when there's something we know we need to do, but we don't have the capacity to start. We might have thoughts like, I keep thinking about it. I keep thinking about it. And whatever it is we need to start is just going on loop, just looping and looping. We might have the thought, I'll do it when I have more time or energy, or I just don't have the bandwidth to start. There might be a sense of confusion with it. Where do I even start? This is so overwhelming. And just feeling stuck. So if any of these feel familiar to you, you're not alone. These are different experiences that we can relate to in different parts of life. And for care partners in particular, the intensity and frequency of these moments often increases. So if we know now what it feels like, what's actually happening in these moments? So consider that we have the same task, and now we're going to heap on exhaustion, overwhelm, and stress. One way to think about this is that every task has kind of a starting threshold. And that's the point that to us, it feels possible to begin. So if a task is below that threshold, it can really feel just like a 6-inch wall, and it's not that hard to begin. But then when we're in a situation where the dial is turned up and there's all this overlay, the exact same task that used to feel like a 6-inch wall can now feel like a 6-foot wall to surmount. It's a completely different experience for even the very same task. So things that used to feel manageable may now feel impossible to start. And this is why you can think about something all day and still not start. Something that's true for us as humans is that we don't start tasks based on how important they are. Is that we actually start them based on how possible it feels. So when something feels above the starting threshold, a really common response is this, and that's that we wait to feel ready. I'll do it when I have more time. I'll do it when I have more energy. I'll do it when I feel ready. And that absolutely makes sense. That's a natural tendency, and it's exactly how our brains are programmed. But the problem, especially in a caregiving situation, is that that moment doesn't come where we're going to feel ready. So we end up waiting and we don't start. The conditions may not be changing anytime soon. And that can compound and lead to us losing confidence in our own ability to start and kind of changing how we feel about our own identity as far as somebody who's able to get started. But really, it's all going back to that load. So our question becomes, how do we lower the threshold to get started without needing to feel ready first? When we wait, something else starts to happen, and this is where we can get pulled into a cycle. So there's something that you need to do. It feels overwhelming or unclear or heavy. So we're feeling overwhelmed, and then we wait. And that's a great solution in the short term because we get some relief from that. But then the task doesn't go away, it's still there. And then now it starts to feel bigger and harder to start. And now we start to have a lot of shoulds. We start to feel bad about waiting. And just because that's a really unpleasant experience, we try to put that away by waiting more, get more overwhelmed, and so on. And we can just get really stuck in this cycle and not know how to get out of it, not have the tools to get out. So just kind of wondering, a moment of self-reflection, does this cycle feel familiar to anyone? That definitely to me as well. So if waiting to feel ready is what's keeping us in the cycle, what if readiness isn't actually required? We all tend to operate from this path. Again, just because we're human. I'll do it when I feel ready. I'll do it when I feel better. I'll do it when I feel more motivated, less overwhelmed. But we have another option. We can take action even when we don't feel ready, which is very counterintuitive. And it means that we're not waiting for our thoughts and feelings to change before we act. And acknowledging that feeling ready doesn't have to be a prerequisite for us to start. So, how do we actually do that? When we're aware of something we need to do, we naturally experience thoughts, feelings, different body states, maybe competing urges of wanting to do something else, do a different task, and then different physical states. And because we're humans, our instinct is to struggle with these things. And our instinct is to try to get rid of them before we act. So maybe the thing that you're trying to initiate is that you want to take a 15-minute walk for yourself or do something else just for yourself. And maybe some thoughts come up like, this is selfish. Other people don't have this time, so I shouldn't either. I'm barely keeping up, so how could I possibly make time for this? Maybe there's just a feeling of guilt that fills you up or sadness. Or maybe when you think about doing the walk, your body just gets really tired and drag. So if this is an example of some of the thoughts and feelings that come up right at the moment we try to start, especially like doing something for ourselves, which is one of the hardest things to do, let's actually slow that moment down and look what it's doing internally. So we're going to do a quick experiment together. And I want you to think back to the task that you identified at the beginning of our time, of the one thing that you wrote down that's been difficult to start. And I want you to imagine yourself right at the moment that you're about to begin it. And on that same piece of paper, I'd like you to jot down whatever shows up internally when you think about starting. So it could be the thoughts, feelings, something in your body. It could be an unconscious rule, like I have to be in a flow state to start, whatever comes up to you. And I'm just going to give us about 15, 20 seconds to think of a couple. Okay. Hopefully you had the chance to identify what comes up for you when you try to start. And this is something that we all experience, that the moment we try to start something that matters, our mind brings up thoughts and feelings that make starting harder. And then very often, our tendency next is to try to get rid of those thoughts and feelings first or push them away before we can begin. Okay, so for this next part, I'd like you to participate in a way that feels comfortable for you. So if you have a like neck problem or shoulder problem or any kind of issue that would make it painful, please do it in moderation, or you can even do it in your mind. But if you're able to do it physically, you'll get more bang for your buck. So we'll go ahead and get started on that. Okay, so this exercise is not one that I made up. This is from Russ Harris, who is a psychologist and an international trainer in acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is one of my favorite exercises where we can recognize struggle as the problem. Okay, so I want you to take your sheet of paper. I was vulnerable and I put mine up here. So one of my difficulties starting is figuring out an online banking issue in my family. And then I shared a little bit of what comes up for me when I think about starting that. So we've got our piece of paper that we've written down the task that's difficult to start and then what's coming up for us. And I want you to copy me again, if you're comfortable. So we're going to take what's hard to start and those thoughts and feelings in both our hands, and we're going to push it away as hard as you can. I really want you to put a ton of effort into pushing it away. I want you to straighten your elbows, keep on pushing. I bet you can push a little bit harder. This is what our culture tells us to do, is get rid of the thoughts and feelings. Get them as far away from you as you can. Really push your shoulders out. Really get it as far away as you can. And as you're pushing, I really want you to notice the effort that you're putting into getting those thoughts and feelings away from you. I'm not sure if everyone's trying hard enough. Keep pushing. Okay. Now let's take what we were resisting, what we were struggling with, and we're just going to set it down in our lap. How does that feel? We're dropping the struggle with those thoughts and feelings and we're resting it in our lap. I'd like you to notice, how much less tiring is this? How much more energy do you have now that we're not putting all that energy into pushing it away? How much easier is it to engage and focus with what's in front of you? So as you imagine that same task, that you wrote down, what changes in your sense of being able to begin it when we've dropped the struggle with the thoughts and feelings? Um, I want you also to notice that what we wrote down on our paper, that like the feelings of dread and annoyance, the thoughts that I'm annoying the bank people with all my questions, that those haven't gone away, but we're treating them differently. Sometimes the thoughts and feelings that come up might include useful information that we can act on, and that's fine. But when the thoughts and feelings are pulling us away from starting something that matters, we don't have to push them away and we don't have to solve them or fix them first. We can simply notice them without judgment and we can start with them. So it's really not a requirement, a prerequisite to solve what shows up inside before you begin. The shift here isn't about getting rid of difficult thoughts and feelings before we take action. It's learning how to start with what's here. And this is exactly what caregiving asks of us in real life. I want to directly acknowledge that the thoughts and feelings that show up in a caregiving role aren't small. They're often extremely intense of grief, fear, exhaustion, uncertainty, frustration. And these are all things that make complete sense in your experience. So this approach is not at all meant to dismiss those, or it's not at all meant, it's not meant to dismiss those. It's meant to meet it. We're not trying to minimize anything or pretend that it's easy. Really what we're trying to do is make a little bit more space for what's here. And so we're not prisoners to what comes up when we try to take action. So just a couple other things to notice from our exercise. When we were struggling with our piece of paper, how tiring was that? We didn't even do it for a minute. And I don't know about you, but for me, it started getting tiring. So imagine doing this all day of struggling with our thoughts and feelings and notice how much bandwidth that's consuming. What if we were able to eliminate 10, 20, 50% of our bandwidth that's going toward that? How effortful was it to keep pushing those thoughts and feelings away also while you're trying to figure out how to get started? I also want you to notice how distracting was it to do that? So how much is that pulling you away from the actual first step of getting started with the task? When we're saying I shouldn't be having this thought or feeling and we're resisting it, we're trying to get away from us. How much of us is occupied with that versus problem solving how to start? And lastly, I'd like you to notice, while all your effort was going into struggling with the thoughts and feelings, how hard is it to take action? Just that it's kind of draining the tank. So putting it down, it doesn't mean that the rope disappears, that we're struggling with, the piece of paper disappears. And it doesn't mean the situation still isn't hard. It just means that we're not giving our energy away to fighting with it. We can observe what's here without judgment, meaning that we don't have to do something about it before we act. The idea being that we're not caught in the struggle, we have more capacity to take a step. Instead, we can take one step with what's here, even if that includes fatigue, uncertainty, stress, grief. This is a friend of mine, Michelle, and she is crossing a sketchy bridge in Glacier National Park. It was in the middle of a 3-day trip we were doing, crossing 40 miles. And so there was only one way through. Our car was at the other end. And she didn't have the option to wait for the bridge to feel safer or for the pack to feel lighter. She took that next step with everything that was already there. So that's the shift that we're talking about. So how do we do this in everyday situations? How can we allow our experience to be there and initiate? And what we're going to get into next is lowering the starting threshold. If you think back to the 6-inch wall and the 6-foot wall. Because when something feels big or unclear or emotionally loaded, that first step is the hardest part, is getting over the wall to initiate. So what we're going to do here is lower the bar intentionally and focus on one small, specific, doable step. The strategy we're going to use makes the first step more doable. And this is one that in my clinical practice that I call just one. And what it means is identifying one small, specific, doable action that has a clear beginning and end and that moves you in the direction that you care about. So, not the whole task, because that's going to make an overworked brain shut down, not finishing, but just starting. So, as we've learned, tasks are hard to start when they feel unclear, really big, emotionally loaded. Just one works by doing the opposite. So, what's unclear, we're going to make it specific. What's overwhelming, we're going to make it small. We're not trying to solve the whole task. We're just solving the starting point. Let's get into some examples. So let's say that our intention is clean the garage workbench. And if your garage workbench can look anything like ours, it might look a little bit like this sometimes. So you go to attack the workbench and oh my goodness, it's so overwhelming. There's garbage to throw away. There's things on the bench that do have a known home. There's also things on it that belong in other parts of the garage or maybe in the house. But then there's also things on it that don't have a home and you have to make decisions about. So all of that is enough to make your brain want to run away screaming. So this would be a perfect opportunity to try a just one. So instead of tackle the workbench, that's so broad. Like, what does that even mean? We're going to turn that into a one-step command for ourselves. So it might be, I'm going to throw away one piece of garbage. Okay, maybe I can't tackle the workbench, but I can throw away one piece of garbage. I can definitely do that. So you do that, and then you get a little bit of dopamine release in your brain. We just got to win. So as you're feeling that, if you're up for it, you could do another just one. Maybe you throw away another piece of garbage. Like that's all we're doing in the moment is just that one action we're staying present with. Maybe I'm going to take one screwdriver and put it back on the rack thing. And then eventually that's how the whole thing gets done. However, if we don't have the capacity or time to do serial just ones, maybe every time we go in the garage, we commit to doing a just one on the workbench. Here's another great everyday example that I bet many of us can relate to. So you've done a bunch of laundry, put a lot of time into it, and now we've got a pile of clean laundry. So how long can the laundry sit on the bed or on a piece of furniture or in the basket? If it's anything like me, it can be a long time. I don't know why, but it can just feel so overwhelming to put our attention to detail to put it away after you've done all the other steps. So when you're feeling the overwhelm looking at the clean laundry pile and you want to go do anything else, what if we do a just one? So what if you say, brain, we can hang up one shirt right now. And your brain's like, oh, okay, that sounds a lot more doable than dealing with the whole laundry. After you do that, if you're feeling good, maybe you can hang up another shirt, or maybe you can sort the socks out of it. And that's your just one. Maybe every time you come in the room, you're going to do a just one with the clean laundry. So instead of ignoring the pile and then feeling bad about ourselves because we're ignoring it, we're chipping away at it. But we're actually practicing initiation and taking action. So really our goal here isn't to increase raw willpower. It's to change the shape of the task so it's startable and so it feels different to our brain. I want to share that just one can also be a mentality. This is a picture of me crossing the Belly River in Glacier National Park in the fall. There's supposed to be a footbridge that goes across the river, but when we showed up, the Park Service was literally putting it away for the season. So it wasn't an option to use the bridge. And it was the beginning of a 5-day trip that we were expecting some weather, some cold temps. And so I didn't want to risk getting my shoes wet and anticipating they would dry out in time. So against what I usually do, I had to cross the river barefoot. There was not really a clean, easy way across. And if you backpack at all, if you fall in a river with your backpack on, that's a really big deal. It's a really big problem. So I actually use just one as a mentality to navigate this situation. So if I just thought cross the river, that felt overwhelming and uncertain. But instead, contacting the present moment, I was just doing this step. Now I'm just doing this step. And so it's really like eating the elephant one bite at a time instead of trying to eat the whole elephant at once. But it's how you're conceptualizing it in your mind. Okay, let's look at a couple examples related to navigating the role of a care partner. Um, let's say that you're trying to figure out why therapy sessions are suddenly mysteriously not being covered. That can feel really overwhelming because it's ambiguous, it's financially stressful, maybe it's emotionally stressful because you've had other negative experiences with the insurance company. There's no clear beginning or end. And so this is definitely one that we might know we need to do, but it just is really hard to initiate. So we might be having the thoughts, this is going to be a nightmare, the feelings of dread. So if we kind of think back to starting with those, we can acknowledge those thoughts and feelings without judgment and let them be there. And with that, think of a just one. So instead of just like blindly going in and calling them, which can feel too big to our brain, what if our just one is we're going to write down the question that we need answered? What if our just one is locate the customer service phone number and we're going to put it in a place in our phone that we know we might need to call that number a bunch of times? What if we don't feel ready to make the call, but our just one, our micro action toward that is we're going to designate a notebook that's going to be our insurance notebook. And we're going to take our reference number and our phone call notes and all of that in there. And that's kind of increasing our readiness to begin. All those pre-steps also count as just ones. And again, we're taking action instead of not being able to take action due to the paralysis that comes with things like this. Okay, so I would like you just to think for a moment. Let's break down this broad one of like, let's say that someone on your loved one's care team says, it'd be a great idea to create a routine for your loved one or a system for them. Or maybe you read that advice online. And then you get home to think about or to start that. And it's like, wait a minute, how do I do that? And it feels too ambiguous. So you don't start. It's too hard to start. So I'd like everybody just to write down a just one of how you might break this down. I'm going to give you about 15 seconds. Okay, hopefully you had the chance to think of a just one. A couple that I thought of for this would be um, choose one part of the day to focus on to start making a routine. Are we going to make a morning routine, an evening routine? So let's just start there. That's much more doable than create a routine. Now we're getting in. Maybe part of our process is we're going to log what's happening right now at that time of day. So that maybe informs us later on what we might change by creating a routine. And by the way, there's probably hundreds of great just ones for this. Maybe one of our just ones is write down a goal of the routine of what we want that routine to do for us and for our loved one. So it really any time that you are facing a task that's feeling too difficult to start, notice is that task does it have multiple steps in it? Is it ambiguous? And if that's the case, your go-to can be turn it into a just one. What about self-care? So a lot of these examples we've talked about are outward facing, but just ones apply just as much to taking care of ourselves. And this is especially true where our own needs are likely to keep getting pushed to the side with everything that's going on. So for many care partners, self-care is not just hard and abstract to do. It can actually start to feel irrelevant or impossible. And we may intellectually know that it's important. And it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's really that there's no bandwidth for it or capacity. So just like the laundry, just like the routine, just like for me the bank, for all of those, it's too big. So it's ambiguous, it's undefined, it's overwhelming, it's not actionable. Even if it's something like I should exercise more, I need to take better care of myself. We know now that that's not just one language and that that's not helping doing our brain any favors to take action. It's not startable. So self-care doesn't have to be a full routine. What if we reframe it to be one doable step? So maybe we transform do self-care into I'm going to do box breathing. That's when you breathe in for a set amount of seconds, like maybe 5 or 6 seconds, and then you hold that at the top. It's almost like if you throw a ball up in the air and then you're imagining it coming back down. It's that pause for 6 seconds, you breathe out for 6 seconds, and then you pause before the next one. It's a great technique to calm our nervous system. So maybe you commit to doing that for 1 minute, and that's more than zero self-care. Maybe you send one text to a friend who makes you laugh or encourages you, makes you feel supported. Maybe you commit to drinking one glass of water, not 8 ounce glasses, but just one. Maybe you write one thing on your mind in your journal. We're not committing to a daily journal practice that might be impossible right now. Maybe we're just going to write one thing on there. So really what we're talking about is doing one toward move instead of an away move towards something that matters. And that's our underlying value that we know we can't pour from an empty cup. What is one toward move for that? So even if your mind says this just one business, this isn't enough, we can notice struggling with that feeling too. And we can allow that thought to be there without judgment. We can just notice that it's there. And we can go ahead and take one step with that. So if our brain is saying these don't count, it's too small, you can say, okay, thank you, brain. And they're supposed to be small. Because the goal isn't to figure out the whole thing at once. It's to take action and trusting ourselves that we can figure out more just ones. It's really the opposite of being unable to take action and just being frozen by the thoughts and feelings that keep us there. With that, I wanted to talk about a little bit of troubleshooting that comes up in my own personal use of Just One and my clinical practice. I'm sure there's more out there, but just to notice a couple of common ones and how we can scaffold those to make this strategy work for us. So here's a little overview, and we're going to go a little bit more into each one. But some things that might happen would be like we do a Just One, and then we forget to come back and do another Just One. So that might feel like Just One isn't working. It might be that we build up our train of thought through staying on a task longer, and that doing the Just One, when you try to come back, that you haven't had the benefit of already thinking about that task and doing another step. And so your brain's like, oh, Just One's not going to work for this. Maybe you experience some shutdown, some paralysis trying to figure out a Just One, and you don't know what that might be. We talked a little bit about this one. Your brain might argue and say Just One is too small. It doesn't count. So why bother? You might feel like I actually don't have time for a Just One. Or your mind might experience ambivalence or internal resistance to doing it. So let's just look at some potential antidotes. and scaffolds for these. So for these first ones, forgetting to come back to the task later, or if only doing a just one breaks your momentum, we can scaffold that with whether you like to write things down or use an electronic written thing like like an app on your phone or an electronic calendar to remember things. This is where we might make a reminder to do the next just one. Like on the iPhone, the reminders app, that's one I use all the time and a lot of my clients use. If you go under a reminder and you click under it, you can actually reveal a section where you can write notes. And so like one thing I've been doing recently is fighting a little bit with a workers' comp company to get paid. And I have a whole series of just ones. So I can take action on that because that's a super ick task for me. And then when I come back to it, I know what my last just one was, and I know what my next just one is when I'm going to return to that task. If stopping is breaking your momentum, you can also, before you walk away and do something else, in that moment with your momentum, think about what's your next just one and then record that. And then that way you have that cue ready for you when you're ready to come back to it. Let's say that there's some paralysis when you're trying to figure out a just one and you can't think of one. One thing to just like check out inside is, notice if your brain is fused with a rule that it has to be a perfect just one, or it has to be the very first just one. And what if there's other things before that? And if that's happening, we can notice the experience of our mind judging that and being fused with that rule. And we can say, you know what, any just one counts right now. Even if it's not the perfect just one, if I start taking action, I'm probably going to figure it out. So it's okay if I'm going to go in with an imperfect just one. If you're noticing kind of that one that your mind is saying this doesn't count, that's too small, that might be one where we're thanking our mind for that information that, our mind is there to try to help us and give us input. So it keeps us safe, or like, maybe this is keeping us safe from wasting our energy. And this might be a time that we kind of overrule that and say, thank you so much, mind, for that information, but I've got it and I'll check back in with you after I do my just one. If you're having some ambivalence, so that means like you're kind of feeling like somewhat motivated to do the just one, kind of on the fence about it, or you're feeling internal resistance to do that. First, we should recognize that ambivalence is a normal part of the human response. We all feel ambivalent about taking action and about change. So, can we let that be there and not have to solve that first? And then another piece of that I really like is look at the task you're trying to start and can you connect that with your values? Like, what is your why of why you're doing that task? So like mine of resolving the online banking issues that are happening, that would probably like relate to a value I have of efficiency. So I'm not spending as much time on things that are taking me away from parenting or my clinical practice or other things that matter to me. So sometimes if we can really bring our values out of dormancy and identify what our why is, that can give us some juice to overcome that internal resistance to starting. What if it feels like just one is still too much and there's not time for it? That's probably a cue that your just one is still too big. And what we can try is some micro just ones. So let's say that your just one is you're trying to get your loved one into a specialist. Maybe the micro just one is you're just going to locate the number of the PCP, the primary care provider office, where you can call the nurse, and then try to start that referral process. I'm going to show you how micro just ones played out in my life when I became a parent at age 39. So micro just one became like, again, a mentality, kind of a way of life for me when I was juggling a new clinical practice or private practice, becoming a parent and all the things. So if there's parents out there, I'm sure you can relate to this, feeling overwhelmed all the time when you're brand new to all of that. Um, so when I had my daughter, it was really my value to raise her in the mountains and keep getting outside, also for myself. And I really needed to get out for my sanity. But the starting threshold for that really felt 10 feet tall of all the things that had to happen to get her outside. Oops. Sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, we'll make that go away. Um, so I used to take her cross country skiing in this chariot, and there was a ton of steps. And even when I arrived in the parking area and I had gotten that far, there were still like tons of steps. And it almost made me want to go home sometimes because it just felt like so much. So the way that micro just ones showed up here was right now, all I'm doing is opening the tailgate. So you like notice how that lands differently in your mind from I'm taking her skiing to, and it's like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, but I can open the tailgate. Maybe right now I'm just getting my skis out. Now I am putting the chariot together one piece at a time. Now there's so many other things competing for my attention, but all I'm doing right now is staying present with putting on my boots and lacing them up and so on. I'm only packing the backpack. Now I'm only putting the baby in the warm outfit. Now I'm only buckling her up. And then if I'm lucky, I'm gonna remember to put my keys in the tailgate. Um, so this was really the only way I could keep doing it and then keep getting the benefits and rewards of doing it without shutting down and not doing it from the overwhelm. Same thing, like when I was trucking her along and there was a big hill in front of me, and my brain was like, oh, like we don't want to go up this, that's going to be so much. Like, how are we going to get up the hill? And it was just this step. I'm only on this step, like nothing exists but this step. Now only this step. And then you're at the top of the hill eventually. Okay, so just kind of wrapping up for today. What I'd like everyone to do is go back to what you wrote down that's hard to start. And I want you to make it into a just one. So go ahead and write down what is one tiny, discrete part of the task you could do right now. Maybe something that could be done in under 5 minutes. Really really think of it as an action, not a thought. So, like, if you can use a verb to start it, like write, find, call, step. And as you find your just one, I'd like you to notice, how does that feel different in your system? Does it feel lighter? Does it feel surmountable now? Does it stop some of the looping of your mind that's trying to get you to do it, but it's kind of fighting with itself? And I also want you to notice that the task hasn't magically solved itself yet, but you've created an actionable starting place. And that's the power of the just one. So, what I hope that you will leave today here with is that you don't have to wait to feel ready, and you probably will never feel ready. So, that's not a prerequisite to start. You can take a step with whatever is here. And that step is just one small action that has a clear, defined beginning and end. The goal at this point isn't completion, it's movement after movement, tiny movement after tiny movement, that we eventually acquire the summit, the completion. What you're dealing with is already hard, and you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to solve everything. One step is enough to begin. Okay, thank you so much. You're welcome to contact me at either of these places. You can find me.
We do have some survivors in the audience, and sometimes they have an attention span issue, which impacts their ability to start something. So what do you recommend that they do?
Mm-hmm. This is a wonderful strategy for survivors as well, because whether or not your brain injury itself affected executive functions or task initiation, which it's very common it does, but there's also all of the things that we talked about for care partners that are there, all of the fatigue and overwhelm and grief and role changes that can come with that. So yeah, so definitely just to acknowledge that. And then getting to your question about attention span being challenging with the just one, um, if you're able, I would suggest using written strategies to work through your just ones to offload working memory. So you're not holding the task and problem solving a just one in your mind. Um, and so I think your attention is less reliant on holding all that information at once. So if we write down what we're trying to start, we've already offloaded something. And then using that as a place to capture the just ones can focus attention more than trying to do it within. And I also would consider talking through it with a loved one, or if you do therapy, that sometimes in a dyadic situation of like talking through with somebody else, that can change the landscape of attention than just trying to do it within. I hope that got at the intent of your question.
What do you do when you, like, for instance, when you have to call Xfinity about something and you know it's going to take a long time, you'll be switched around, 2 or 3 times, your call will be dropped, and you literally feel tired before you even start. What do you do with something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things come to mind. If people in the audience are familiar with like spoon theory or brain bucks, it's called lots of different things, but it's really this idea that, like, let's say we wake up with $20 of energy, and then we spend that energy throughout the day, and sometimes we can go into debt. So I imagine like calling Xfinity, it might be a $17 task. So I might think in that situation that I'm really going to pay attention to what I do before I start that task. So I'm not draining my battery before. And I'm also not going to be planning things for after. So I might plan like a rest break before and after. Secondly, I would consider offloading as much as you can for that phone call and having everything written in front of you. So you're not burning mental energy of generating those things on the fly. That's where I would maybe start.
Often when you have to call medical offices, you deal with a lot of some hostile, unhelpful people. It's really common for TBI survivors and their family members. And how do you initiate a call when you know you're going to be facing like hostility or
Mm,
unpleasant people?
my goodness, that is so draining. Yeah, like that's like if we have $20, that can be like a $30 task and put you in the red. Yeah. Yeah, it's draining on so many levels. It's like unnecessary things to process and it's emotional. And we're also living in a world that people don't understand brain injury unless they've been touched by it, either by themselves or a loved one. So you're already like going uphill against that of an invisible injury. And even if you have like speech is affected, you might be being judged for speech. If it's hard to keep your train of thought or there's a language component, you're already contending with that and now dealing with the hostility. So I think my answer to the previous question applies. I also think like, I would almost like add an affirmation of the hostile person behavior is information about them. It's not about me. And I know that's really hard to do when your identity has been shaken by the injury and maybe you're already grappling with that yourself. But it could also be a priming thing that you're giving your brain that input. If I talk to a hostile person, I will remind myself that that's information about them. I think also sometimes almost like calling people out or advocating for yourself in that way of if you're comfortable, and you shouldn't have to do this, but starting it off with I've suffered a traumatic brain injury and communication is challenging for me. Please be patient with my communication. That's going to make it a little bit harder for that person to justify hostility to themselves. So those would be some of my tips.
Thanks so much, Audra, for this presentation. It was very helpful. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good afternoon. Take care.